Ah, an American voice has just told me recording in progress. Yeehaw. Okay. So if I wave my crosshair cursor around the diagram, can that be seen, please? Yes, no, hello?
Yes.
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 Good.
Yeah, fine.
Good, good, good. Just a lot of people popping in. So today we're going to start with the basic anatomy. Honeybees are advanced social insects. They overwinter as an entity. Now, this is the thing that some people find a wee bit difficult to get their head round. Honeybees are individuals, obviously, and you need to think about them as being cells of the body, the colony being the body, okay? Because there are, at its peak, anything up to 60, 70,000 bees in the colony, and they are individual parts of the colony. So the honeybee has been described as the most useful of all insects known to man because it provides man as well as other forms of life with basic services vital to their survival. This the insect has been able to do because nature has endowed it with special organs which enable it to live a peculiar way of life. To understand the creature, a closer study must be made of its anatomical structure, which enables it and it alone to perform such. The functions it can perform include gathering and ripening nectar, collecting pollen and propolis, producing wax, etc., and incidentally fertilizing flowering plants, and therefore being extremely useful to mankind. With no disrespect, I think I'm going to have to mute the mics because something's fluffing about in the background. So, are you guys still seeing the diagram?
Yep.
Okay, that's good. Right, so we have a head, which is this bit here. We have the thorax, which is the bit the wings are mounted on, and we've got the abdomen, which of course has got the sting at the back end. So starting with the head, it's triangular in shape. It has 5 eyes, a pair of antennae, and mouth parts, consisting among other organs, 2 mandibles and the proboscis. So we've got 2 eyes, one each side of the head, and this ocelli here is one of 3, and these are the eyes that enable the bee to see in the dark, because the hive obviously is in the dark. The antennae are used for communication and also for measuring cells, and there is an antennae cleaner on the front leg. The proboscis forms into a tube, and the bee uses that for sucking nectar from flowers and also for dealing with honey, or nectar rather, in the hive in the process of turning it into honey. Bear in mind that when nectar arrives in the colony, it is somewhere between 18 and 20% nectar. The rest is water, and that water has to be evaporated off. We'll go into that later on in more detail. So the compound eyes are composed of several thousands of simple light-sensitive cells called omenatidia, which enable the bee to distinguish light and color and to detect directional information from the sun's ultraviolet rays. The eyes of the drone, which we pointed out last week, are considerably larger and are there to assist him to locate the queen as he pursues her on a mating flight. The antennae, which are these bits here, they're a pair of sensitive receptors whose base is situated in the small socket-like membranous areas of the head wall. They move freely in every direction. The antennae's functions are to feel, to touch, and to smell, and thus to guide the bee outside and inside the hive to differentiate floral and pheromone odors and to locate hive intruders. Now, I cannot emphasize too strongly how important pheromones are in a bee colony. The mandibles, which are there, they are pairs of jaws suspended from the head and parts of the bee's mouth. The insect uses them to chew wood when redesigning the hive entrance, to chew pollen, and to work wax for comb building. They also permit any activity requiring a pair of grasping instruments, which is a nice way of putting it. The proboscis, unlike the proboscis of other sucking insects, that of the honeybee is not a permanent functional organ. It's improvised temporarily by assembling parts of the maxillae and the labium to produce a unique tube for drawing up liquids such as sweet juices, nectar, water, and honey. The insect releases it when needed for use, then withdraws and folds it back beneath the head when it's not needed. So, the thorax, which is this middle section, the thorax is armor plated and it supports 2 pairs of wings, 3 pairs of legs, and carries the locomotor or engine and the muscles that control the movement of the head, the abdomen, and the wings. If the bee gets cold, for example, it will move its wings to exercise the muscles in the thorax, raise the body temperature, and enable it to get up and going. The whole of the thorax and the abdomen and parts of the head is full of blood, which is cold. So by moving these muscles, it can raise the blood temperature internally. The legs, each pair of legs differs in size and shape from the other 2 pairs and is jointed into 6 segments with a pair of claws at the tip, which help the insect to cling to surfaces. A bee will happily walk across a horizontal pane of glass upside down and not fall off. Upside down and not fall off. For some peculiar reason, gravity does not appear to affect honeybees the way it should. The leg can be flexed at any of the 6 joints. Its primary function is to help the bee to walk and run, but various parts also serve special purposes other than locomotion. For example, the brushes on the inner surface of the 5th segment, the tarsus of the 2 front legs, which would be hereabouts, are used to help move pollen back to the pollen basket on the hind legs. It's also used for cleaning pollen and other particles from the head, the eyes, and the mouth parts, and the same tarsi of the mid-legs serve as brushes for cleaning the thorax, while spines found at the end of the 4th section as tibiae are used for removing pellets of pollen and for cleaning the wings. 2 important parts to note on the legs are the antennae cleaners on the front legs, namely there, and the pollen baskets again on the hind legs. The antennae cleaner focused on the inner margin of the tibia of the forelegs consists of a deeply cut semicircular notch equipped with comb-like row of small spines. All of the cast's drone queen worker have this cleaning apparatus. The pollen baskets, the tibiae of the hind legs of the worker bee carry the special apparatus called the corbiculae, or pollen basket, which enables her to carry pollen into the hive. These pollen baskets, concave in shape, are surrounded by several long hairs which bind the contents into an almost solid mass, allowing the worker to carry the load safely home. All very, very ingenious. The wings of the honeybee, like most insects, are thin, flat, two-layered. The front pair is much longer than the rear. The worker's wings are used for both flight and ventilating the hive, while the drone and the queen use theirs for flight only. And just out of interest, there is a joining system between the forewing and the hindwing that effectively acts as Velcro. And that's how those two wings are joined together. Velcro appeared somewhere around about the mid-70s, and bees have been using it quite happily for several million years. The abdomen, which is the third and rear section. Like the thorax, the abdomen is armor-plated. It contains such vital parts as the heart, the honey sac, the stomach, the intestines, the reproductive organ, and the sting. As seen from the outside, only 6 segments can be observed, but the adult honeybee has 9, whilst a larvae has 10. The interest of the beekeeper is usually focused on those parts of the bee which make it capable of producing honey and wax and performing other duties necessary for its survival. Among these are the hypopharyngeal gland, the wax gland, the center pheromone glands, the queen's pheromone glands, and the sting with the passion gland. The hypopharyngeal gland is located in the head of the worker, in front of the brain. It starts to mature 3 days after the bee's emergence and develops only when the insect secretes royal jelly to feed larvae and the queen. The wax gland, located in the lower part of the young worker's abdomen, under here, and there's 8 wax glands, so they can produce 8 flakes of wax at a time. The young worker's abdomen releases wax between a series of overlapping plates called stemma. The workers begin to secrete wax 12 days after emerging. 6 days later, the gland degenerates and the worker stops comb building. So it's a time-limited activity. The worker bee produces 3 main scents. The gland beneath the sting produces a special pheromone consisting mainly of isopentyl acetate, which it sprays around the spot of the sting. The odor stimulates other workers to pursue and sting the victim.
This guy, I can't read him.
Sorry, is somebody asking a question or are they having a chat with somebody else? Right, thank you. Now, if you move bees with a travel screen in a vehicle, you will become aware of the smell of isopentyl acetate because it smells very, very similar to a very old-fashioned sweetie called pear drops. It's a very pungent odor and very distinctive. And it tells you loud and clear that those bees are not happy bunnies to mix breeds. A third gland located near the rear of the abdomen produces a pheromone which, when released by scout bees, attracts swarms of other bees to move towards them. And that is this one here, the Nasonov gland. And I'm hoping that on one of the videos, I will be able to show you the Nasonov gland in action. The queen's pheromone glands. In the queen bee's mandibles are located special glands which produce and release pheromones called the queen substances, which enable her to identify members of the colony, to inhibit ovary development in worker bees, to prevent the workers from building queen cells, to help a swarm or colony to move as a cohesive unit, and to attract drones during mating flights. The absence of the queen substance i.e. when the queen dies, produces opposite responses, i.e. worker bees begin to develop ovaries and to build queen cells, and a swarm searching for accommodation will not cluster, but will divide into smaller groups that cannot support the normal life of a bee colony. So in other words, a queenless swarm is a no-hoper. The sting of the worker bee is designed to perforate the skin of our enemies and to pump poison into the wound. It has about 10 barbs, so that when thrust into flesh, the bee cannot pull it back again. It breaks off with a poison sac always attached to it, enabling more poison to penetrate for as long as it remains in the flesh. The bee's sting is lodged in a special sheath and is released only when the need arises. The sting of the queen bee is longer than that of its worker. It is used only to fight and kill rival queens in the hive. The drone has no sting and is totally defenseless. Now, I have handled hundreds upon hundreds of queens, and I have never been stung by one. I've never heard of anyone being stung by one. So that is a non-starter. We'll have another look at the sting versus the man-made needle later on. And it's worth mentioning that if you do get stung or you are helping somebody who has been stung, do not try to pick it out with your finger and thumb, because all you will do is inject the remaining contents of the venom sac into the victim. Use a thumbnail, a credit card, something sharp. Scrape it out. Now, in our colony, we've got 3 castes. We've got the workers, we've got drones, and we've got queens. Now, this is where it starts to get complicated, and I am going to tell you as much as I understand, and beyond that, I leave in the hands of bee breeders and geneticists. Workers, because the queen mates with multiple drones, let's say for the sake of argument, 15, when she lays eggs, she fertilizes the eggs, and there can be 15 choices of sperm to fertilize that egg. If she is being, shall we say, picky, and she lays 15 eggs and uses sperm from the 15 different drones to fertilize each egg, you have 15 subsets of half sisters. Right? Let that one sink in. Drones, which are unfertilized eggs, are related directly to the queen's parents. And we will stop the anatomical aspect there. Now, just bear with me a minute. Where are we now? New share. We want to go to that bit. Is everybody seeing a very basic diagram with the numbers 1, 2, 3 on it? Can somebody say yes?
Yep.
Right,
yes.
Lovely. Thank you. Okay. Number 1 shows the spiracles. And they are external respiratory openings, of which there's 3 on the thorax and 7 on the abdomen. They branch to every organ in the bee's body. Each spiracle has a valve to control the flow of air. The spiracles access the trachea. The trachea arms, 2 of, widen, forming air sacs which store air. There are few air sacs, however, they have a large volume and can be contracted, which speeds up oxygenation in the tissues. Small branches and tubes known as trachea and tracheoles emerge from the sacs, branching as far as the tissues to which it supplies oxygen. Bees can accelerate the passage of air into their bodies by contracting their air sacs, speeding up the rate of oxygenation. Now, we'll mention this again when it comes to disease, but the trachea, trachea are here, can become infested with tiny little mites. And this was at one point thought to have been the cause of the infamous Isle of Wight disease back in the late 20s and the early 30s of the last century. Since been debunked as a theory, but that is where they were found. And that research was done, dare I mention it, at Craveston. So we'll have a little look at this. Apis mellifera is the generic name for the different strains of honeybee. The native bee in the UK is Apis mellifera mellifera, and bees approximately are 26 million years old. As we've said, they're advanced social insects. The simple or intermediate social insect is the wasp or the bumble. Now, the colony life cycle arguably starts in autumn. We are now third week in January, and this is where we are at. We have numbers of bees on this side of the graph. We've got January, February, March, April down the bottom. And we've got this line, which is dying off. This line is the queen laying eggs and new bees coming into joining the colony, hatching out. If the hatching rate overtakes the death rate, the colony takes off and is a success. If, however, the queen is unable, or the colony is unable to support the queen to lay enough eggs to hatch to get to that point, it's a nosedive and it's RIP. And this X here is known as the crossover point. So it's very simple. If it doesn't get by that crossover point successfully, it dies. So this is what you want to see at this time of year. And I was looking at this, it's not taken yesterday, this was taken a few years ago, but that's what you want to see at this time of year. That is a nice winter colony tucking into its fondant and getting on very nicely indeed. And you notice all this reddishness on the top bars, and it's a lumps there, a thickening there. That, my friends, is propolis in action. Hang on a minute, I'll get some comments coming up. Can tick removers work for removing a sting? I've got no idea, never tried it, but I suspect not, because I think they would squeeze. Right, spring failure, we just really covered that. Queen laying has just not taken off. Death rate is nosedive in. That's it. As they would say in the northeast of Scotland, it's tatty's on the side. Now, a quick rehash on the important bits. The head, two big eyes, three ocelli, proboscis, antennae, and mandibles for the wax. Sting at the other end of the bee. Abdomen, digestive organs, reproductive organs, wax and scent glands, workers only, honey stomach and more spiracles, all bathed in blood supplied with oxygen via the spiracles. Here's our friend the sting again. There's the barbs that we were talking about to make sure that that stays lodged, and that is the tip of the sharpest needle known to man. I've shown you this one as well. Sting well and truly lodged, and there's the venom sac. And this is where your scrape comes into play. Now, something we haven't mentioned is the famous smoker. Most people know very little about bees, but they do know that a beekeeper uses smoke and deals with swarms. The smoker, the traditional story is that bees, being forest creatures, if there was a forest fire, they would load up with honey, ready to evacuate as an emergency swarm, and the honey would enable them to be able to build comb when they got to a new safe location. And the theory is that having smoked the colony, the bees will take on board honey, and because their honey stomachs are full, they're a bit like you after a Christmas dinner. The last thing you want is a punch-up because your stomach is too full. It's one of these things I don't think has ever actually been proven. It's a nice story, but I don't think there is fact to back it up. Setting that aside, smoke can be useful to keep a colony under control. And the smoker comprises the fire chamber here, the bellows there. You can see a little black bit just there. The tip of my crosshairs will just be underneath it. That blows air into the air chamber here. There is a little grid that sits like a trivet, and the combustible material sits on top of that. Now, beekeepers will argue how many bees can dance on the point of a sting for hours on end. One of the classics is, what is the best smoker material? Well, back in the day when I could get Hessian sacks for nothing, for rubbish, I used to use Hessian. Nowadays you can't get it, or very rarely do you see it. I personally burn very dry, rotten wood. When I'm out walking the dogs, if I see a rotten log lying in the woods, I'll have a poke with my fingers. If it's rotten enough that I can pull a chunk off, that's rotten enough for me. I'll pop it in a bag, take it home, and it sits in the garage for a year, maybe more, until it's really dry. And then I light it, and I cheat because I have a little self-igniting blowtorch, and I just turn the gas on. I go click, I've got my flame, light the end of it, and I put it burning end down into my smoker, puff, 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 and it works. It works very nicely indeed. And what's more, it's free. I'm not going to be rude, but buying stuff to burn in a smoker, to my mind, is just daft. There's plenty of stuff floating about in the countryside, free to have, produces a lovely cool smoke. You don't get sparks flying out. You don't get flames coming out the end of the nozzle. I mean, I have seen people smoking colonies so vigorously, it's a wonder that the neighbours haven't called the fire brigade. I mean, smoke bellowing out, sparks shooting out, flames gushing out. It's just ridiculous. Smoking is just a little puff. It's all that's required. You know, it should be dainty, not towering inferno. Now, hive tools. These are the two primary shapes of hive tool. The one on the left is called a J tool because of the shape. The one on the right, I believe it's called a scraping hive tool, or just to my mind, it's just a hive tool. Believe it or not, this one is almost 4 times as expensive as the one on the right. And the idea behind this J and the notch here is that if you're having difficulty getting the frames out, this is turned round. So you have your top bar like that, and you put this flat piece against that top bar, and you prise up the end of the bar that is to, from the way I'm looking, to the left of it. Probably you're seeing it in reverse, will be to the right. And then you've got the two-way scraper at the end. This one, the last time I bought them, this is the Hive tool I use. I bought 4, I think, for the price of this one. And if you want to lever up because things are tight, well, you turn it round so that the flat edge is like that, and you just lever. Simple. If you want to slacken off your frames, you use that upside down so that the curve is in between the frames, and you twist and you open up the frames. If you want to clear off brace comb, you can either use that end or you can use that end. To me, it's just the better design, but you know, each to their own. And this is the sort of scenario where you might want to use a bit of scraping. This is obviously a polystyrene brood box. There's 10 frames, and of the 10 frames, I would suggest these 2 haven't yet been occupied, but all these are active. Now, before you put a queen excluder on top of that, what I would be doing is taking my scraper and cleaning off this wax. You just take your scraper and you go along the top bar with a bit of vigor, and the wax you can pick up in your hand, stick it into a bucket, take it home because it's valuable, right? And you might think, well, there's nothing much there. Well, there's not. But you times that by 8 frames, and there's actually a bit more than you think. And if you do that 3 or 4 times a year, and you've got 3 or 4 colonies, you are not long in building up a decent amount of wax, which can be used for making cosmetics. It can be used for making polish. It can be used for making furniture cream. It can be used for lubricating thread, for sewing heavy material like denim. It can also be used if you have some wooden furniture and your drawers have got a little bit sticky. It can be used on the wood to act as a lubricant. It's extremely useful stuff. And that, by the way, is a very healthy spring colony that's well on its way to needing a super and being ready to start producing some honey for you.
Just off the back of what you're saying about the beeswax, Pete,
Yep.
I do a bit of turning.
Yeah.
And beeswax, you can water it down with a wee bit of boiled linseed, incidentally, but beeswax is great for polishing up your finished pieces.
Of course it is. It's the best polish there is. Yep. Now, in fact, I'm just in the process of making some polish. Hang on a sec. Yeah. And of course, you have to have the proper label. And there's a warning label for the underside of the tin as well. Right, so I think that's that bit finished. Now, we want to go back to bear with me a second. Zoom and right, can we now see a hive sitting on some bricks? Yep.
Yes.
Right, brilliant. Okay. This was several years ago, and it's a very good example of scout behavior. Now, you'll read, no doubt at some point, you'll read about, oh, and 6 bees checking out my hive. Is a swarm about to arrive? Well, see for yourself.
I might take a piece of video of this because it's the noise I'm after as much as anything. This is.
Are you getting audio in that, guys? Anybody?
Barely.
Yes, quite faint though.
Faint. Okay, let's try something else. Right, let's try this. Give me a thumbs up if you're getting it now.
Very close investigation going on of a bait hive. Inside
That's
the hive, there's
Yes, no?
much better.
Okay, right, I'll start from the beginning.
top of my head, I think there's 9 frames. I thought I'd take a piece of video of this because it's the noise I'm after as much as anything. This is very close investigation going on of a bait hive. Inside the hive, there's, off the top of my head, I think there's 9 frames. About 6 would be drawn comb, 3 will be foundation, maybe a bit, or maybe 1 more drawn comb, 1 less foundation, secondary. 2 days ago, we sprinkled lemongrass oil, quite profusely to be honest, over the top bars. Not in any sort of systematic or measured way in any size, shape or form. Just unscrewed the bottle, splitter, splitter, splitter. Now then, there's something in the region, all in all, I would say 200 to 300 bees investigating this box. They're coming in and going out, coming in and going out non-stop. So I'm going to shut up for a minute, zoom in on the entrance, and let you listen to the sound. This is not, to my knowledge anyway, an arrived swarm. These are scouts. So we're checking down underneath, they're popping in, they're popping out. Just somebody said in the forum, it's full to see them all the tape measures. But that actually is what they're doing. They're in there, they're measuring the cubic capacity of this box. It is a national. I've taken swarms in nationals before now. And we did the drubbers, I must admit, for a while. So there you go. The mutants. Oh, yeah. Right, I'll cut this off here, go and stick it up on YouTube and post the arrow on the forum for you folks to have a laugh at my optimism.
And then what happened was absolutely nothing. It went stone dead. Not a bee to be seen. And I thought, oh, all that hope went. But half an hour later, I'm going to turn this up even a wee bit more. And this is what happened.
And after a little period of quietude, look at this. One swarm arriving. Oh yeah, dancer. Oh yes, 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 yes. Brilliant. Absolutely superb. You couldn't make this up. In fact, the other video stopped uploaded to YouTube. Woo. Now, what you can do under these circumstances is get a water spray and spray the air. But to be honest, I don't think there's much point today. These guys know exactly where they're going. Listen to this sound. Now, I'm going to be moved a whole bunch of objects, so I'm doing something else. Right. Look at this. Look at this. Isn't that magnificent? Oh yes, there's nothing like getting something from nothing, isn't there? Right, I'm going to shut up and let you listen to the noise.
Now, you can't actually see it, but these bees that are on the front, they are facing into the colony, into the entrance, and the entrance. They've tipped up their back ends to expose the Nazimov gland, and they are fanning frantically backwards, and they're sending out this Nazimov smell. And basically what they're doing is saying to the rest of the girls, this is where we are. Come on, in you come. This is home. And the Nazimov gland in swarming is very important.
Now, the lens is about 2 feet away from the entrance of the hive. I haven't been done silly because I haven't got a veil on. But that's piling in. Right, I'll keep you posted on what happens, but I'm going to upload this one now.
So there you go. So that's a swarm arriving, and it's one of the most impressive things you'll see.
I'm going to bought myself a fake flow hive. Is it as good as the original flow hive? We'll have to wait and see.
What are your thoughts on that, fella? Because I've been watching quite a few of these videos of late.
I follow him as well.
Right, so let's have a look at our overview of the year. So we're starting in autumn. There's a famous beekeeping saying, which is, take your losses in autumn, not in the winter. If you've got colonies that you don't think are strong enough to go through the winter, bite the bullet in autumn. It's a really hard thing to do, but bite the bullet in autumn and unite colonies together so that you've, even if it means putting 3 into 1, or the alternative nowadays is use polystyrene nucleus hives so that you can nurse a small colony through. But traditionally, you took your losses in the winter. So in the autumn, the queen begins to reduce her laying. The drones are evicted as they are no longer required. Now, that said categorically, the drones are evicted, right? Which implies 100% out the door. The reality is it's not unusual for the odd drone to go through the winter. It's not a sign that there's anything wrong with the colony. It's just that he managed to dodge the evictors. The workers in the winter hive last the whole winter, give or take, unlike summer workers who live 6 weeks, again, give or take. The bees form a cluster, and it can be said that the individual bee is cold-blooded, but the cluster is warm-blooded. The queen in the dead of winter pretty much stops laying. But how long for? Depends on the weather. And this in turn is quite an important thing for us, because one of our big problems with beekeeping in the UK at the moment, and worldwide for that matter, is Varroa. And we'll come to Varroa next week when we cover the diseases. But Varroa is a parasite. It breeds inside the sealed worker cells and drone cells. And when it's underneath the cappings, chemically, it's very difficult to attack. So when there is no brood is a very useful time to be able to do Varroa treatments. So the queen in the dead of winter pretty much stops laying, although if there are some warm spells, she may lay a few eggs. As winter progresses, the cluster moves slowly, consuming stores as it goes until, stimulated by longer hours of light and warmer days, the queen starts laying again. So this winter, if you think about it, we've had a lot actually of quite warm periods. So I would fully expect that there is sealed brood in my colonies at the moment, and most colonies in Scotland actually. So we're back to the crossover point. The winter bees are now dying off in serious numbers. The queen's laying more and more eggs. It takes 21 days for the egg to hatch. The crossover point is when the hatching eggs outnumber the daily deaths, and so the population starts to rise, and at that point, the success of the colony is reasonably secure. Now, we are not at crossover point yet. Probably, I would say, end of February to the middle of March that's when it's going to tip one way or the other. And I'm pleased to say of my 14 primary colonies, all 14 are alive and well as things stand. When the queen really gets going, she kicks into high gear and she can be laying as many as 1,500 to 2,000 eggs a day. Each cell is inspected by the queen and measured. If it's a worker cell, she lays a fertilized egg. Worker cells are 5 to the inch or 5 to the 25 mil. Drone cells are larger and are 4 to the inch, 25 mil. And in there, she lays an unfertilized egg. It will hatch despite a lack of sperm, and so is directly connected to the queen's parents, as we said a wee while back. Excuse me a minute. As queens mate with multiple drones, they carry inside their spermatheca sperm from as many as, well, they're saying 20 drones. I mean, to be honest, I've seen numbers from as low as 10 to 30. So, you know, throw a dart, take your pick. I guess a lot depends on how much sperm each individual drone actually has. Hence, subsets of half-sisters in the colony, which in turn explains why the temperament of a colony can rapidly change, remembering the 6-week lifespan. The queen also exudes pheromones which are transferred from her by the bees which groom her, feed her, and remove her waste. This retinue is ever-changing, and due to the food exchange in the colony, with workers arriving with nectar and giving it to the house bees to store, eventually every worker knows that the queen is alive and performing. And this is where swarming starts to kick off. The queen has got X amount of pheromone that she can generate per day. The population of the colony is increasing day on day, ably helped by the beekeeper. And if you think of it as a lovely Victoria sponge, right? And it's a finite cake. The bakery shut down, your oven's bust, you can't produce any more cake, you've got the one and that's it, chum. So in May, you've got, let's say for the sake of argument, 10 frames of brood, right? And you've got a population of 40,000 bees. In June, you've got 18 frames of brood and you've got 60,000 bees and rising. The cake is the same size. So it's being sliced thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner. And the dosage of pheromone that is being spread around the colony is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, there comes a point at which you're going to have bees, especially if there's quite a heavy nectar flow on, where these bees are involved in dealing with nectar. They are stuffed full because there are no cells left to hang nectar across. Most of the cells are occupied by sealed brood. And along comes a bee who's just been working with the queen. She's got a full load of queen pheromone. And this bee doesn't want to take any food because it's already stuffed. And that's where the breakdown of the pheromone increases rapidly. There's far more bees to get a slice of the cake, but there are also a squad of bees who are unable to take that food transfer and so get the pheromone. And the breakdown starts to multiply. And the breakdown means that the inhibitor element from the queen pheromone is diminished to the point where a lot of the bees in the colony are thinking, maybe it's time to refresh the queen. Now, the interesting thing about swarming is if you think of big cats, for example, it's back to front. Big cats or domestic cats produce litters and they, the adult, look after the youngsters until they're fit enough to look after themselves. Same with us with kids, right? It's just the way it is. Honeybees do it the other way around. Mummy is the one that gets thrown out with the swarm to take the risk of setting up from scratch. The queen cells that are left are able to hatch into an existing scenario where they've got support, they have that backup, the combs are built, the colony exists, they are relatively risk-free. So it's a back to front way of reproducing their species, but very effective. Now, there's three things actually that can happen, three different scenarios. One is the classic, and don't think you have to take all this in now because we're going to discuss all of this more or less the same again. Repetition helps it into the old brain box. It gets to the point where the bees say, okay, we're going to think about increasing ourselves. So they start to raise queen cells. So you've seen the picture, they look like little peanuts. And the first thing that the bees do actually is they modify a cell to make it what we call a queen cup. So instead of being 1 of 5 to the inch, they bell it out and it becomes approximately 10 millimeters across. So you get 2.5 to the inch. And by itself, that's absolutely meaningless. You can have 1,000 queen cups in a colony and the colony is not going to swarm. But bees are like good Boy Scouts. They like to be prepared. The first sign you're going to see that a colony is thinking, not doing it, but thinking about it, is an egg in a queen cup. But that again in itself doesn't mean anything, because you can look 10 minutes later and that egg will have vanished because a worker bee will have come along and said, oops, Queenie Poo's made a mistake. I'll move this and I'll pop it into a worker cell for it to turn into a worker. The first sign that is cast iron that this colony is going to swarm is you have a hatched egg, a larvae, in a queen cup. And at that point, it is no longer a queen cup. It is technically known as an incipient queen cell. In other words, it's a queen cell that's going to grow. So, depending on how swarmy the strain is genetically, you might get 10, you might get 5, you might get 50 queen cells. It all depends. But the bottom line is, it's a definitive statement of we are going to swarm. And the next thing that happens is after 5 days as a larvae, the cells are sealed. And at that point on, it's down to weather. When they get the right weather, whoosh, they're off. So when I say they're off, who goes? There'll be drones, there'll be workers of all ages. It's not just the older workers that go. Some of the young house bees will go as well. And you'll keep in mind that the bee, when it is born, when it hatches, is 3 weeks in the house and then 3 weeks as a field bee. So at 2 weeks of age, that house bee doesn't even know what its hive looks like from the outside because it's never been outside and flown. But in the excitement of a swarm, it will go with the rest. You know, it follows the pheromones basically. Half the population of the hive will go, give or take. And the queen, once the cells are heading towards being sealed, the bees will change her diet. They will put her on a crash diet, slim her down, and make sure she's fit to fly. Because without the queen, the swarm's useless. In fact, if the swarm hangs up and discovers they haven't got the queen with her, they'll say, stuff it and go back to the colony again, which is something, as beekeepers, we use to our advantage. But when I come to the actual swarming talk, we'll cover all of that. So, having gone to find pastures new, what happens in the hive? Well, depending on how swarmy the strain of bee is, if it goes to the nth degree, the first cell that hatches, that virgin will not be allowed to kill the other cells. Okay? And the bees will then what we call cast, C-A-S-T. And a small swarm will issue with that virgin. The next cell to hatch, again, depending on how swarmy they are, might cast again, and again, and again, and again, and again, to actually the point where the original colony is effectively abandoned. The brood's just left and it chills and dies. But they've sent out 10, 15 prime swarm, which is the one with the mated queen, and then subsequently smaller and smaller casts going out. And obviously each of those casts is a high risk adventure, because they have to set up somehow and allow that virgin to fly and mate, and that could take up to 4 or 5 weeks, in which time a lot of these casts obviously will die. So that's the one aspect. The second aspect is the prime swarm goes. The first virgin that emerges is allowed by the workers to kill the virgin queens in the remaining cells. And that virgin is then in the pole position to fly, mate, and head up the colony. The last scenario is called supersedure. And that is where the virgin flies and mates, but the queen doesn't swarm. And you end up with 2 laying queens in the colony. It's not that common. It's not actually as rare as some people think. And it can last a surprising length of time. When I first started out, I was doing some queens rearing work with a bee farmer up in Rossshire. And he told me that he and his son almost came to blows over a colony because they both had a clipped, marked queen on a comb. And because of the marking, they could identify that that supersedure had actually been running for 18 months. Now that is unusual for that length of time. When I took bees to the heather, I used to find, because I had clipped, marked queens, come the spring, about 60% of my colonies had superseded on the heather. They'd quietly change queens on the heather, no swarms, no drama, just raised a virgin, she flew, mated, carried on, old queen, just died off. And in the spring, nice new queen heading up a colony. Happy days. So that's the three aspects to swarming. It can be a lot of drama. It can be extremely useful. And sometimes it's a lot of fun. And other times it's a complete nightmare, especially when they decide to go down somebody's chimney. So in spring, one of the things that people struggle with a bit is, especially if they've been feeding fondant, is what do they do with the combs that are solid with stores? So there's no actual room for the queen to lay up. And some people call it being honey bound. There is actually a very simple answer, but it causes shock and horror amongst some of the more established beekeepers, because they've been taught by people who were taught never to split the brood. Now, the brood nest, you can almost visualize it as a ball. You've got little patches of brood on the outside, slightly bigger on the inside of those combs, slightly bigger and bigger and bigger, till you've got virtually whole frames. When you get to 4 decent sized frames of brood, you can take one of your outside frames, take the flat of the hive tool and crush the cappings so that the honey actually oozes out the comb, and you crush all the cappings, both sides. It may drip, it'll look messy, don't worry about it, the bees will sort that out. and put that frame slap dab in the middle of your 4. You go and have a look next week on your weekly inspection, and you will find you have got 5 frames of brood, because the bees have consumed all of that honey because it's in the wrong place. They haven't got anywhere else to put it, so they eat it. And by eating that honey, they generate the heat required to keep the frames of brood in existence warm. Bear in mind, it's at 34 degrees centigrade, right? In late April, early May, when it's still externally, it's pretty cool. And having got to your 5, you can then repeat the process, bruise another one, stick it in the middle, week down the line, you're at 6, etc., etc., etc. When you get to 8 frames of brood, that's the point at which you would think about putting on an excluder and a super. Now, if you're working nationals, you've got 11 frame capacity in your brood chamber, so you can keep going +1, which is what I call bruising a frame and adding it in, is +1. You can +1 to the point that you've got, let's say, 9 frames of brood in the box. But the queen is still wanting to expand. That is where you take your second brood box, you take 3 or 4 of brood, put them in the bottom box, fill that box out with either drawn comb or foundation, set it on the floor, second brood box on top of it, with the now reduced brood in that box centralized. So you've got brood below with brood above on top of each other to keep the nest reasonably compact. You would put a bruised frame either side downstairs, and you'd put a couple of bruised frames in the top box, and a week later you'll have all of those brood frames drawn out, laid up, ready to go. And that is how you work your colony up to filling 2 brood boxes. But bear in mind, even though you've put some of the brood downstairs, you still had 8 frames, and that's the point at which you should be supering. And I quite often put a super on top, another brood box down below, and the bees will carry on expanding the brood side of things, but they'll also start working in the super on top. So you're increasing your bee population, and you're starting to get a crop of honey at the same time. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. Now, to some people, what I've just told you is completely wrong. And it's only fair to be honest and let you know this. But what I find quite amusing is when I get told point blank that what I'm saying is a load of rubbish, I say to them, well, have you actually tried it? No, I wouldn't do something like that. I was told never spread the brood. And fair enough. They genuinely believe it because that's what they've been taught. But the people who taught them had never tried it either. But I was taught how to do this by a bee farmer who at the time was running 350 colonies, something like that. And it worked for him. It's worked for me for over 30 years. So I'm passing on to you something that works. But you won't find it in the books. There we go. Have we got any questions so far?
I've got a few questions actually that I've been saving up, if that's okay.
Go on then.
The first, most of them are very simple, but see the comb building, to go back to the comb building, the time limited activity, the wax production from, sorry, I put on my video, wax production from the
8 days.
Wax glands. Is it only the workers that have got wax glands?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Secondly, the sting, you said the workers and the queen only have, the workers and the queens only, somebody's not muted their microphone. I can hear somebody else. The workers and the queens only have stings and the drones don't. So is it true that every time you're stung, and I've been stung a lot, that the bee dies?
Yes.
Yeah. Third question was, I completely missed what you said about the smell of pear drops. I couldn't hear what you were saying there. Something about not happy bees and the smell of something about pear drop sweets. I completely missed that.
Right. If you're moving, I just said it's for the situation that you'd experience the smell. If you're moving bees inside an enclosed vehicle,
Yeah.
especially with a traveling screen, you will get the smell of pear drops. And
Right.
that's the venom smell.
Oh, I see. Right. I have moved bees, but I've never had that smell.
And
Right.
the alarm pheromone. Oh,
Right.
if you smell it, you'll
You'll know.
remember it.
Right. Okay.
Oh, aye.
Okay. Right. That's right. And the last thing, see in your bait hive, and I thought that video was great to see the swarm arriving and everything. I thought that was terrific. What were you spraying? Were you spraying inside the hive on the top of the frames with some kind of lemon? Is that what you said?
Yes, it's the essential oil, lemongrass.
Ah, right. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. That's great. Thanks very much for that.
And
Thank you.
people say, by the way, I said in the video, I splittered it vigorously. If everybody knows what splittering is, if not, we'll translate it into a wee bit of English. It's splashing.
Okay. Okay.
It's taking the bottle and splashing it on the top bars.
Right.
Now,
That makes. Can I ask you a question about putting things in the hives to get rid of? We had one problem on the apiary site with ants. Ants were in the hive.
right.
Right, and can you spray them with lemon oil, lemongrass?
Traditionally, the cure for ants is to put the feet of the stand into buckets of water.
Oh, right, right,
Just a physical barrier.
right. That's a good idea.
But personally, I've never had trouble with
Have you
ants.
not? Right. Somebody said cinnamon, but that didn't seem to make an awful lot of difference to put ground cinnamon in it.
Why
That
would you
didn't
want
make
to
any
put
difference.
something like cinnamon in a hive?
God knows, I don't know. But anyway, we did try a bit of cinnamon, but it didn't seem to make any difference. So that's a good idea, the legs in water. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, no problem. Yeah, when people talk about bait hives, the classic research was done in the States. And the guy that did the research came to the conclusion that a volume of 40 litres, 15 metres in the air was the ideal location and space to attract a swarm. Now, first of all, as I mentioned earlier, colonies in the States can be considerably bigger than ours. There's a direct correlation between the size of the colony, the size of the prime swarm. Our prime swarms are not as big as American prime swarms, and therefore we don't need massive 40-litre volumes for swarms to occupy. I have seen swarms happily occupy 5-frame nuke boxes. And they wouldn't do that if it didn't suit them. You saw from the scouts arriving that they are very thorough in their measuring. They go back to the swarm and they report, I found what I think is an ideal location. And it's actually very democratic. The swarm sends out a lot of scouts, and scouts that go back and say, I've found that perfect spot. And the bees will say basically, well, why do you say that? And the scout will say, well, it's this by this, and it's that, and it's got this, this, and this. And the bees will say, well, okay, yours sounds more interesting than the other scout that's reporting. And gradually, the location that is the most interesting location gathers the most scouts. Now, as you can see from my video, that national box was very interesting because there were 300 or 400 scouts checking it out. And when that number of scouts check it out, they attract, the whole swarm makes that decision. Okay, we'll go and have a look at this. We're not promising we're going to stop, but we'll have a look at it. And that is, it's like buying something in the shop. If you don't pick it up and look at it, you're never going to buy it. It's the same with a swarm. If they don't arrive and check out a location, they're never going to use it. So there's a lot goes on in a swarm when it comes to deciding. I know I'm getting kind of sidetracked here, but I actually sat and watched a swarm debate over 2 hives. One was polystyrene, one was timber, and they were at opposite ends of a 40-foot building. And they went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And at times it was like big chunks of the swarm was going, you know, a cloud of bees. And eventually they made the decision and they all piled into the poly hive, which pleased me no end because I knew it was the best one anyway. Okay, anybody else for anybody else?
Well, off the back of that, Pete, I've got my hive finished now. It's all built, all the foundations put together, so on and so forth.
Yep.
Is it worth my while sticking it into the site that I was going to put it to just now?
No.
No. Okay.
No. It's the middle of winter. I mean, today there are no bees flying.
Okay.
So all you're doing is sticking it out in the weather for the sake of sticking it out in the weather. No. If you're hoping to attract a swarm, I wouldn't even think about putting it out until the end of May. But if you're going to buy a nucleus of bees, that's a different situation.
Okay.
Which takes
When
me
could you buy them?
towards the end of April when they're strong enough. Yes, Larry.
Can I see if you're doing a double brood box?
Yeah.
So if you're building, I've just heard different ways. Would you keep that the full 11 frames on both, or would you have that reduced frames on the? So it's like an 8 frame and 8 frame on top of each other.
What's the point? You're losing 6 frames.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. So they would expand to the full 22 frames.
Yes.
They would. Okay.
Oh yeah. If it's a decent queen, yes. I mean, I know that there was somebody that had a system whereby they ran double brood, but they had 16 frames.
That's what my mentor's been doing that in their apiaries, and so.
Yeah,
But I've just read different things, and I've seen other ones who don't do it. So I was just wondering, you've been doing it longer than my mentor's been doing it.
Yeah, but I know who your mentor's basing his system on, and he was a very highly respected beekeeper, and I'm not knocking what he did, but I'm a greedy so-and-so. If I can get an extra 6 frames of brood, I want my extra 6 frames of brood. I like my pound of flesh.
Right.
I mean, it just makes sense to maximize. You've paid your money, you might as well maximize what you can, get from the situation.
Okay.
I mean, if you actually twiddle it around and think about it, those 6 frames could be 2 nukes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And each of those nukes, well, I was looking at nuke prices yesterday, 250 quid up. So there's 500 quid. That's better than a honey crop.
Yeah.
Well, it's not better than a honey crop because a honey crop's a honey crop, but I mean, it's a nice little bonus.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thanks very much.
No problem at all. Whereabouts are you from originally?
Las Vegas.
Okay.
Viva.
Been living here for a long time, though.
Rightio. Welcome to Scotland. Anybody else?
Yeah, one of the things that we saw earlier on, and I'm assuming you didn't hear either of us mention it to you, when you were showing us the video, it tripped over to Lawrence, I believe his name is, at Black Mountain.
Yeah.
I've been watching a lot of his videos.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any thoughts on the videos that he produces? Do you even know who he is?
I know who he is. I speak to him now and again. I haven't actually watched, I don't think, more than one. So I'm not going to pass comment.
The video that you tripped over, I actually watched the other day there. He's got a knockoff version of the Flow Hive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And where did the Flow Hive originate?
I think the original Flow Hive, was that not an Australian thing?
Climate, climate, and climate. And I'm saying no more.
Yeah.
And I don't think they have a particularly large amount of oilseed rape either. And actually, long story short, I was in a chat room a lot of years ago before video, and a lady asked the question, what should she do, because her son had just been stung by a bee. So obviously I told her. And the next thing was, long story short, I ended up in Australia. Not to scrape out the sting, I might add, but I made good friends by that stage. And I can remember being driven past an enormous yellow mountain next to some vertical containers. And I said to Ken, what on earth's that? And he looked at me like I was daft. He said, it's wheat waiting to go into the elevators to go on the train. And it was just lying outside. And there was hundreds of thousands of tons sat there. And that's when the penny dropped with this bear of very little brain. I was in a completely different climate. So, you know, I've been in Australia, I've been in the States, I've been in Canada. And when I say we have a climatic difference between us and them, I do actually have a little bit of knowledge. And I was lucky enough for a number of years to have a sinecure of a job in the offshore oil business, where we had an extraordinary amount of time to just sit and twiddle our thumbs, especially on night shift. And I had access to the American Bee Journal and Bee Gleanings, or Gleanings, I think it changed its name to. And I read 30 years worth of those magazines. And I actually came out from a general anesthetic, picked up American Bee Journal, and they used to have a quiz. And I got 96% 20 minutes after coming out of general anesthesia. So I had a fairly good idea about American beekeeping at that time. So when I say emphatically that there is a climatic difference, there is. You cannot underestimate the difference it makes to how we keep bees compared to what they can manage. And I like to think we keep our bees rather better than some of the big boys across there. Okay, so having covered a bit on swarming and a bit on spring management, have we got anybody else with it? Oh, Shona, you were wanting to ask something.
You were talking about what to do with your wax earlier on.
Yeah.
Any suggestions about using it to waterproof your beehive? I've read a few places that they mix it with rolling seed and paint it on warm onto the new beehive to instead of painting it.
Yeah, is that on the inside or the outside?
No, the outside.
The outside, yeah, because you don't paint anything on the inside.
No, but I just didn't want to paint them, start the painting thing, you know.
Right. Are they timber or poly?
The timber.
Right. Are they pine or cedar?
Both. I've got one of each.
Right. Cedar, you don't need to do anything.
Okay.
Right. Cedar is just self-protective.
Okay.
Your pine one, by all means, wax and linseed if you can get a decent emulsion with it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Thanks.
No problem. Any more for any more?
Hey, can I ask a question? Sorry, I popped it in the chat, but I don't know if you can see it. I am hoping to start keeping bees this year. I haven't before. And I don't have a mentor at the moment, and I'm just wondering how vital that is. I don't want to do it if it's a stupid idea. But I've joined the local beekeeping association, but I only managed to go to one meeting before they stopped due to COVID, and I'm just finding it hard to find someone. I just wondered what your thoughts were, whether it was worth trying or not, really.
Well, whereabouts are you, Emily?
I'm in Caithness, Thursday.
All right, okay. I did a talk to your association a number of years ago. And I had a lovely welcome from them as well. So I would try and find a local if you can.
Mm-hmm.
You're a member of, obviously, the SBBI group. If you weren't, you wouldn't be here. So if you've got any questions, don't think twice about dropping me a message and asking.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna keep trying. Obviously, I mean, hopefully before spring they might start again. Who knows? But I've just been entertaining the idea of doing it without a mentor, and I don't know whether I should be. So I think maybe it's possible.
It's definitely possible. I mean, I did my first 2, if not 3 years actually without a mentor. And then life got a bit complicated, and I ended up with Bernard for a start, and then Hamish after Bernard. And I did find that the mentorship was extremely useful.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I wasn't working 1 or 2 colonies. I mean, I was then involved in 50 plus, which was a different situation, obviously. But I mean, if you're looking for somebody to come and actually stand with you at the bees, then obviously you need to get somebody local.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I think that would be the kind of thing that would be a challenge, is having 2 brains to look at something and think about it rather than my own would be handy. But yeah.
Okay.
Never mind. Thank you very much.
Well, the thing is, does the Caithness Association have a Facebook group?
They have a page, but there's not really discussion on there like there is the group you run. So
it might be an idea to find out who the secretary is or the chairman and suggest to them that a Facebook group, especially under the current circumstances, might be an asset.
Yeah.
And at least you'd be able to have discussions and, chat to people, get to know them, and hopefully strike up a rapport.
Yeah, that's, I think, obviously what's missing at the moment is just not getting to see anyone to start that sort of discussion. So yeah, no, that's helpful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem at all. Anybody else? Is anybody in the borders? Yes, I am, Lenora.
Hi.
I am.
Oh, hi. Where about in the borders are you?
I'm in Lantern. Where's Lantern?
Yeah.
We are in between the Hoyk Road and Jedburgh.
Oh, right. I know where you are now.
Yeah,
I'm just outside Norham.
I heard the name. I mean, I'm not local to the borders, so you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you're not a million miles away.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think, you know, what to do. My dad's a beekeeper, but he's in Edinburgh. So that's not going to work for having a mentor.
Probably not.
No, and my daughter, she's in high school, so she's part of the beekeeping club in high school, but obviously we would like someone else.
Ah. Is that the Kelso High School?
Yeah.
Ah, right, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean,
So I was just
I would
trying to
love
think.
to dive in and offer you, but if she's in with the Kelso Bee Club, then I would have thought the Borders Bee Association was probably your best protocol.
Yeah, she hasn't done it in over a year now. She did it in first year, but then COVID hit, and they started back up, but she hasn't been in it for the last year. Have you? Have you done it this year?
No, because they removed me from the register because, you know, there was so much. And so it was too awkward to go back. So.
They removed her from the register because she was off a lot with anxiety.
Right.
So we now need a new mentor. Do you want to be our mentor, Pete?
I had a funny feeling that was coming down the tracks. I'm always delighted to help if I can.
Oh, fab. Yeah, I mean, I spoke to my dad. My dad's been keeping bees for a few years now. But he's up in Edinburgh, and although he's just retired in the last year, he's not like at my beck and call for a phone call. You know, if there was something serious had happened and we needed help or we needed, you know, advice. Yeah. So we've just been trying to scout, and I said, you know, I'd see where you were. There is actually literally in the other field, there's about 9 beehives, but I don't know whose they are.
All right.
And I keep looking, but I haven't seen anyone yet. So I don't know whose they are. Yeah. But I mean, we're very close. We're very close to the chain bridge.
About setting out a beehive.
Yeah, I know what that, when you were saying about them earlier, I was thinking now, where am I going to put these bait hives? Like, because there's literally a wood at the top of the field, and I'm like, I might just put one of them up there, and I might just put, I mean, we have a big garden, you know, we're really lucky. And I was like,
Are they, yeah,
how,
have they actually got bees?
Yeah. I kind of had a scout, a walk.
Well, a casual walk.
A casual walk, yeah.
Yeah.
They're all full of bees. So, but I don't know whose they are. We live very close to the Chainbridge Honey Farm. Have you heard of them?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so we're not too far away from them, and I wondered if they were maybe their bee. I don't know whose they are.
If they were Chainbridge, and I'm trying to think who owns Chainbridge. I know him by sight. The name's gone. Anyway, if they were his, they would be in batches of 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
I don't think it would be 9 belonging to him.
Yeah.
But if your dad's already a beekeeper, presumably he'll be giving you a nuke to get going.
Well, hopefully.
Right.
So
maybe you ought to do a bit of sweet talking.
I know. I was like, Dad, you know, he's got, how many has he got? I think he's only got 4 colonies at the minute though. And right. I said to him, I said, you know, Daddy, you know, you're going to be like doing things and nukes and things. And he's like, yes, but I've just bought 2 more hives. And I was like, oh. So we'll wait and see.
Right. Okay. You should be able to get 2 or 3 nukes off a colony without too much pain.
Just off the back of that,
working 11 frame brood boxes.
Yeah.
Last week you said that you supply nukes, right? So let's just say, for argument's sake, I got a nuke from you, right? And it's going to come in a little poly nuke box, yeah?
Sorry, I'm not with you. You're getting what, David?
If I was to get a nuke from you, it would come in a poly box, yeah?
No,
What would it come in?
nothing. You would bring a box down to me. We'd transfer it into your box.
Right, I'm with you. Okay, that's fine. That kind of solves the problem, because the reason I was asking is I know that a lot of people, they'll deliver it to you in a nuke box. Yeah?
Yes, but nuke box can mean a lot of different things. It can be a Corex transport box, or if it's a poly box, then they would add the cost of the poly box on top. And I'm hearing that poly boxes are going up in price quite dramatically.
Right, because the question actually was, could a polybox nuke be used as a bait hive?
Yes.
That was the question.
Yeah, I've had swarms come into poly nukes more than once. So, I mean, just to let you understand, because I work out apiaries, I keep a lot of equipment on site. And because it's on site, it tends to have combs in it. And it's not unusual for me to walk down to the apiary and walk across the field, open the apiary gate and think, oh, that's alive. And it wasn't alive last week. You know, bonus. In fact, last year I walked across the field, opened the gate and went, oh, bonus, bonus. I'd 2 polyhives had been occupied by swarms and they weren't mine. Because my queens are clipped.
This is obviously, I've came across that terminology before, and I know what clipping means, and I know mechanically it makes a lot of sense, but it seems pretty brutal.
No. It's a straight answer to that one. It's like cutting a dog's nails. I mean, provided it's done judiciously and carefully, it's not a problem. Okay, anybody else for any more? Right, I've given you quite a lot to think about. So next week, I'm going to compound it by doing the horribles, which are the notifiable diseases. And we're also going to have a discussion about Varroa. And I probably will also mention a bit more about swarming and other bits and bobs that need repeating, because it all helps to make you feel more comfortable with the terminology and the information. Now, how many of you, in all honesty, looked at the table of development and spent some time memorizing?
I tried.
Sorry?
I tried.
Oh, good.
But that's because I'm a nerd.
Oh, well, fair enough. Doesn't make you a bad person.
Yeah, so I did try, but I need to read things a few times before it comes in. It like sticks in my head.
Yeah.
Just like all the swarming stuff. No, I'm not. It's just I have lupus, so it affects my brain.
Aye.
So it takes a good few times for my brain to think, right, okay, I need to remember that now.
Right. Okay. Well, I've actually. Sorry, Larry, go on.
I said, at least she has an excuse. I don't have one. I've been looking at it for the past months, continue looking at it, trying to get all these things. And some of it stinks in, some of it doesn't. Eventually, hopefully it'll be there.
It will, because
I don't have an excuse. Low memory. That's it.
It's your foundation stone. I mean, even if you type it out and get it, I call it plasticized, you know, the where you put it in a plastic sleeve and then run it through the little heat machine and have it in your toolbox, because it's when you're looking at a colony that's gone wrong, that's when you need that information to be able to work back why it's gone wrong and when it's gone wrong and work it out from there. Something I have got up my sleeve for you is a film that was shot in the early 1930s of the last century. And I rescued it off 16mm, I think it was, and got it turned into a DVD. And it's actually on YouTube if you want to have a search for it. It's called 1930s Beekeeping. And part of it is the classic swarm. And it's a 1930s shot of the board sloping down from the hive and the bees just quietly walking up and going into their new home. It's an absolute delight. So if you don't manage to see it between now and next week, I'll try and show that for you then. I realize we're a wee bit short this week, but it's been fairly intense and fairly dense, and I don't want to overload. So before I say cheerio, any other last questions?
Hi, Pete. Can I just ask one question?
Of course.
Just something that's popped up into my head when you've just said that. My hive, I haven't got a landing sort of board going in. Is it essential to have one?
No.
No. Does it just make the life easier for the bees having one?
Arguably it does. In practice, I find the land on the that's my hive.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the entrance down the bottom. The bees come in, they go splat, run down, in they go.
Okay.
Now,
That's
the
great.
reason I don't have them is my history has always been moving bees. I used to move to oilseed rape, and then from the oilseed rape to possibly other oilseed rape, and then from that to the heather. And if you think about it, an alighting board is just a damn nuisance when it comes to loading bees onto a trailer.
Okay.
Takes up space. Nothing wrong with them. Possibly there are advantages, but I've managed without, no bother at all.
That's excellent. Thanks for that.
No bother. Okay, any more for any more? Going. All right then, thank you very much for your time, your patience, and we will meet again next week.
Likewise, Peter, thanks very much for your
Bye,
time.
Pete. Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
all.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye, Pete.